Good day, good day, good day, and I hope you're having a good day. Today in this video, I'm going to share about a pullover that I'm knitting. It's called the Savanna Pullover, and we'll have pictures about that shortly. And 7 things that you can do, that I'm doing for sure, to avoid making mistakes while knitting maybe anything. I'm knitting this pullover and the back panel is complete, but there are errors in the back panel. It's a learning curve for me because I'm basically a basic straight knitter. I can knit hats and mitts and scarves and things that don't really require a pattern. I have done some cables in the past, but this is, there's a lot of eyelet. I guess that's what they call it. There's a lot of holes. We're calling it my holy sweater. Even though I like the name the Savanna Pullover. So I'm going to share that and the 7 things that I use to avoid making mistakes while I'm knitting. And also I'm going to share about the Tell Me technique. It's a great tool that husbands and wives or any partnership, even friendships, even if you're in a social situation and you're, let's say, with a group of people and you don't know who they are, but it's your spouse's work and yeah, we have to attend, you can use this Tell Me a technique with anybody, anytime, anywhere. So I'm going to share that at the end of the video. But first, the knitting. Here's the Queensland Collection Savanna Pullover. You can find this pattern on Ravelry. Yes, okay. And I actually picked it up in my local knitting shop, and I decided to try it out first with some scrap wool. I liked the process, the procedure, and I was actually doing it. And so I thought, well, maybe I should get some proper wool and actually knit this pullover. I picked up some wool at Hobby Lobby, hand-dyed wool. They're carrying that now. It's wonderful. And I got 3 skeins for this sweater. Then I checked my needle. I decided to use the number 6 US, which should, if you use the little measuring tool, should show up as 4.25, but I found it was really loose in that position. It's more like a 3.75. So you have to be careful when you're looking at US or let's say the English millimeter size needles. Do a gauge just to find out if you've got the right size wool needles and if it's going to work out pattern wise. In my case, I had to adjust the pattern so that instead of 135 stitches that they called for in the front or back panel, I'm using 110. So it was good to do a gauge ahead of time. I found that on the reverse knitting row, there's 2 rows. You've got your pattern row, and then on the return or the reverse or repeat or whatever. What am I trying to say? When you go back, you usually have to do a purl or a knit row, whatever the pattern calls for. Most of the times in this pattern, it's calling for a knit row or garter stitch. So what helps is to count your stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. And so you're doing that either manually like this, or you can do it while you're knitting. Count your stitches. It helps you to know if you've got one too many or if you've dropped a stitch, and it's just a way to catch that before you get too far into your work. I've noticed that I have been training myself to do the continental way of knitting as opposed to the English style, which I've used most of my life. And it's a little bit slower going. I am getting better at the tension and the stitch itself. But when I'm working on this pattern, and a couple others actually, I've noticed that I have a tendency to drop a stitch, even though I feel that I'm being very careful not to let that happen. So yeah, I decided just to expedite this pattern along and get this sweater knit, I should use the English method. So do what works for you. Okay, see this eyelet pattern here, which is different than this pattern. This is the 14 rows, which creates a different sort of eyelet look. And then after you do that, you do 3 rows of knit, just a garter stitch, and then a purl. And then you create these eyelets by going like this. You knit 1, knit 2 together, just sort of wiggle it in there, 2 together, yarn over, yarn over. So you do yarn over twice. Be careful it doesn't get bunched up. Then you go slip, slip, and then in behind those 2 that you just slipped, so that's the left hand needle going in behind those stitches. Not always easy, but sometimes it works better. And then you knit, and make sure you don't split your wool. And I'm trying to do this behind the camera, so it's not necessarily working, but not bad. Okay, let's do it again. So it's knit 1, knit 2 together, wiggle it up in there. Then it's yarn over, slip, slip, going behind there, and knit. So that last little step is called the slip, slip, knit. So it shows up, shows up in your work as SSK. And I gotta stop this so I can fix this little problem I've got. See how we run into errors? How do I know I fixed that previous error? You look at the pattern of your row. So there's a pattern that shows itself. See the little eyelet showing up here? And then another little eyelet and so forth. Now, if you look at those eyelets, there is a yarn forward stitch. See how it's slanted compared to a regular knit stitch? So there's a yarn forward, then there's 1, 2, that's a straight 3, 4, and then yarn forward over the hole, I call it. Now it looks to me like there's 2 yarn forwards there. Then knit, 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 yarn forward. Yeah, there you go, 2 yarn. So you see, for a second I thought, wait a minute, I'm making a mistake. But if I go back on my pattern and see what I've already done, in those eyelet areas, I've got the 2 yarn forwards. And then it's knit, knit, knit. There's the hole. There's the 2 yarn forwards. See that? So 2 yarn forwards and knit, 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 3 knits. Then 2 yarn forwards in the hole, the eyelet. And then it's 1, 2, 3. And then again, 2 yarn forwards in the spacing. And then 1, 2, 3, 2 yarn forwards. So that's how you can check your pattern. You learn to recognize the stitches and the eyelets and so forth. And then you can keep an eye on your work. This was a different pattern. This was knit, knit, knit. And there was the eyelet with the yarn forward, and then knit 2 together, and then knit, 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 and so forth. So it's fairly simple pattern. For me, not having done work like this before, it's a learning curve. And I've just shared the mistakes that I've made and how to prevent them, avoid them, how to recognize your work, how to know when you're doing what, so that you can end up with one nice, hopefully nice sweater. We'll find out. I'll share it with you in the end. With the pattern of knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, slip, slip, and knit. And you continue that on, and then you get to the end of your row. Now you have to go back, and it says to purl. So when you're purling along, that's fine. But what happens when you get to those 2 yarn over spots? This is what you do. See the yarn over? Okay, so you purl 1, and then what I like to do is I like to bring my yarn over and then slip off that purl 1, and then you knit 1. You knit the next stitch. And then you bring your yarn forward so that you can continue purling again. So it's purl, purl, I think it's the 4th stitch where we run into the yarn overs, and it's yarn over, you purl 1 and you knit 1, so purl. I put my yarn over so I don't lose that stitch, then let it go off, then I knit, then I bring the yarn forward again to continue purling across the row. So purl, purl, you don't need me to tell you this. You can see this. Okay, so it's about the 4th stitch in, purling, and that's when you get to your yarn overs. It's got a very distinctive look to it. Then you knit 1 and purl and so forth. Now, what does it look like when you're knitting back on the row? This is now the right side again. We did our purl and we did our unusual knitting and purling stitches over the yarn over, yarn over. Now we're back on the other direction. We're not, and this is, the pattern calls for 3 rows of garter stitch. So we're just knitting across, but this is what your yarn over, knit and purl spaces look like. It's your eyelet. So you're going to have some regular knit stitches. It's all regular knit stitch, garter stitch. But then you come to that eyelet area where you had the 2 yarn overs, and one was knit and one was purl, and it creates your eyelet. So that's what it looks like. And you get used to knowing how it looks. See the little twist in there? There it is again. Now let's look at the work and just see just exactly what are we doing. What is the pattern here? What's the repeat? So we have, let me see, this is a yarn over, our last yarn over. So 1, 2, 3. Now we've got 2 sort of looking yarn overs. It's actually just knitting the yarn over where the eyelet is. Sorry, I've got to move that over for the camera. So it's 1, 2, 3 regular stitches. See that, how that is creating kind of a block there? Then you've got your 2 yarn overs that you're knitting. There's no yarn over occurring here. The yarn over was in the previous stitch row. So, but see the look to it? It's like 2 stitches over the eyelet area. And that's how you can recognize your pattern and know where you're at. 1, 2. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. And that's it. Let me just do that one more time so you can get a good bird's eye view of it. So that was 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. And that's how you can, like, if you sit down your pattern and you go away and, you're tending to one of your family members, your child or something, and you come back and say, well, where am I at? This is what you can do. You can look at the pattern. It's a repeat. 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet, 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet, 1, 2, 3, 2 over the eyelet. So this is where I am. I now know I'm at 1. Get my wool in there. 2, 3, and I can recognize the 2 stitches over the eyelet. So I just knit them. And I just do that right to the end of my row until I'm ready to turn it around. And that's knitting. So in case you missed the 7 points, 1 is you put a marker on the right side. Number 2 is you count your stitches on your return row. Number 3 is pay attention to the look of the stitches. Number 4 is don't knit while you're watching TV because you might run into mistakes. Don't bunch your stitches together, and be careful and watch for wool splits. That might be 6, I don't know. But basically those are the points. Well, I wanted to talk about life patterns. You know, we're doing a pattern in knitting, and we know that there's so many things that you do, like knit, yarn over, slip, knit, whatever, and you repeat the pattern. Whatever the pattern is, you figure it out, become familiar with it, get it into your head, and then you repeat it across your row. In this case, the pattern is really easy where I'm at with this whole thing. It's just a straight knit for 3 rows, garter stitch. But life has its own patterns, rhythms, even if you want to call it that. For example, or routines. For example, you get up in the morning, you wash, you dress, you get your coffee, you get your breakfast. Some of you are going to work, others are not. You consider your day. What have you got on the schedule? What do you have planned? Maybe nothing. Some retired people actually don't have anything. Me, I'm just like, I always have something. As my friend said, you have to have a reason to get up for. And that's so true, especially as a senior. Okay, so there's a life pattern that my husband established shortly after when we were first married. Both of us are twice married. He was 54 and I was 43. I think that's the way it goes. Anyways, 11 and a half years between us. And we met and married in a very short time, 6 weeks. I always say to people, it's not advisable to do that, but we were both mature. We had a good understanding of each other, and we just knew it was right. So we're 25 years in, now going on to 26, and it's all good. Doesn't mean you don't have problems. You do. Okay, so the pattern he established was he has 2 professions, let's say. One is his electrical trade, which he studied and learned and gained when he was in Belfast. And then when he came to Canada, he felt a call to the ministry and became a pastor. So he studied and became a pastor. So in his lifetime, he's done both. In fact, he's interspersed both. If you have a small church and not a large income from that church, you go and do electrical work. So he's a pastor electrician. So when we married, he was focusing on his electrical work primarily. And he had occasion to go out and speak. Regardless of where he was, whenever he left the house, he was leaving me for the day. And sometimes I was working, sometimes I wasn't. Initially, I was still studying for my counseling degree, my master's. Anyway, he would leave and come back at the end of the day, and he would come into the house, and he's a very enthusiastic guy anyway, but he would say, "Tell me about your day." And I would just fall into telling him about my day. Didn't think much about his technique, what he was doing, what he was stirring up, how he was doing it. But then one day he actually came home, and I remember him saying, after asking me or saying, tell me about your day, he said, what does that do for you? And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, there's a pattern here. There's a principle. There's something that's going on that's working well. Man, can I live life without a menopause heat up? Apparently not. Anyway, I'm not blushing because of my husband. Because I'm analytical by nature, I enjoy analyzing things, pulling apart the elements. Why does that work? What does it do? So when he asked me, what does that do for you? I analyzed it. And I realized that, number one, it acknowledges me as he's coming through the door. Number two, it gives me opportunity to share, usually just in a very short 10, 15 minutes, about what's been happening in my day, a highlight or maybe a problem to be solved. But usually it was about the pattern in the day, what I was doing. And so I analyzed that even further, and I used it quite a bit in counseling, and I called it the tell me technique. So for example, a man leaves the house, and no matter what your profession is, you're involved in some kind of problem solving. You're either problem solving interrelations with coworkers, or you're problem solving whatever your profession is. An accountant, for example, is solving problems while they're working away on their tasks for the day. So the point is this, that when we are involved in problem solving, we are using a chemical in our system, in our brain, called dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that helps our brain make the connections to solve the problems. Now, I had a professor who said, don't be surprised if your husband arrives home and he's really quite a dope, meaning he's used up most of his dopamine, so he's kind of dopey. And I've heard stories about husbands who come through the door and they say, don't talk to me. I just want to get my boots off. I just want to, hang up my coat and sit down and relax, make a cup of tea, have a glass of wine, a beer, whatever it is that they do. And they're sort of pushing off. In reality, if they entered through the door and did all the stuff, coat, shoes and all that stuff, sit down, greet their wife, and then say, tell me about your day, he's actually giving her 10, 15 minutes, and I used to tell fellas that's all it really takes. Tell me about your day, and you're connecting, you're interacting, and you're letting her know that she's important. And maybe it might even give her the feeling that you thought about her during the day. So, and then after that, after the tell me, in which she tells about her day, as a fella, you can go away and then just do your relaxing. So you've connected with your wife, your partner, in a loving way, a meaningful way. It's acknowledged her somehow. And then you can really relax because everything's good. Now, I know guys are going to say, yeah, but what if she hits me with all these problems? The kid did this, the son did that. Our daughter did this over here, and we need to fix this with school call or whatever. I would suggest and caution women to try to pull out the highlights, the good points of your day. If there's a problem to be solved, and that his dopamine levels are low because he's been using up most of the supply during the day, and it will replenish in the evening, save those problems for another time, after dinner, let's say, or the next morning if it can wait. I know some things are more immediate, but anyway, that's the tell me technique for you.